This episode is brought to you by the Thrive Tribe. Check it out at chasingbrighter.com/Thrive Tribe. Welcome to our book club episode. The book we have chosen has the power to shift how we see ourselves and the world around us. Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. If you've ever struggled with self-doubt, feelings of unworthiness, or the constant pressure to be better, this book offers a deeply compassionate roadmap to breaking free from those patterns. This book guides us to understand that freedom comes not from fixing ourselves, but from accepting ourselves as we are. We're going to unpack its core themes, discuss our biggest takeaways, and explore how radical acceptance can transform our lives. So settle in and let's get started.
Wow, Jess, this was such a powerful book. And it really blended like mindfulness, crazy amount of wonderful self compassion, psychology to help readers embrace who they are as people, like fully. The other thing is, I feel like there's a lot of practical anecdotal stories,
Yes.
and she's a human like the rest of us. And so
Mm.
she really brought in some of that too in her own authenticity.
I loved how she had guided meditations in every chapter. And the chapter on fear really resonated with me. And I want to go back and really sit with a lot of those meditations. And I love,
Yes.
like you're saying, she's a psychologist. So she gives case studies of her own clients. She has studies of people that she's worked with, and she vulnerably shares her stories. And so sometimes I think it's so great because she actually talks about trauma a lot in the book, but also like just petty, stupid things we get involved in our own insecurities. So that made me feel good too, because it's, oh, I don't have some of the serious traumas that she talks about, but I do have silly fears or insecurities. So I feel like she covers a gamut of human experience. So anybody could find themselves in this book.
Yeah. I love her so much. And I really think what came out more in this book than we've listened to her podcasts and loved all of the things that she does.
Yeah.
And this is the first book I read of hers, but she does talk a lot about being a mom, or she mentions that here and there. And I really appreciated that. I think that
Hmm.
part was great. This is, this book is such a calming, centering force. Like, it's almost like I wanna read the book over and over again for the
Yeah. It's
rest of
like,
my
I
life.
feel like because I listen to her podcast so religiously, key themes, like some of the stories that she's told are stories that I've heard her say in her podcast meditations. And so, yeah, just keep listening because I can listen to her podcast over and
I
over.
also love
Listen,
her
just,
jokes.
yeah, I
So
love her
dry.
jokes. Yeah, no, I love her jokes. And so, what I did was I thought that we would frame this episode with just talking a little bit about her key themes. We broke it
Yes.
into three parts, and then you and I, like a book club, ask each other kind of questions. So the big thing that she talks about is us getting in trance. And a lot of it, like the trance of unworthiness, that many of us live in a cycle of self judgment and the feeling that we are not enough. What did you think about her talking about trance? Because for me, the way she talked about trance is almost the way I say that you're triggered, like that we're not in our rational mind and we're living in the trance of fear, a trance of hate, a trance of unworthiness.
I think that it is the use of the word trance to describe it is very fascinating to me
Mhm.
because it makes it seem like it's a state of mind that you can not be in.
Yeah,
And so
right.
I feel like the use of that word is interesting in that it's not terminal.
Yeah.
And a lot of us feel that it is. We feel so
Yeah.
stuck
Yeah.
in this feeling and we don't know how to get out of it. And it's not even that we know you can get out of it. We're just like, this is who I am. And that's not the case. And I think she gave some really great examples of even a lot of people she's worked with. in these cases where they
Yeah.
were able to get themselves out of these
I
conundrums.
like how she talked about spiritual awakening being the process of recognizing our essential goodness. And I think about uh, so I feel like if you read this book, the work is to like untangle negative feelings you have about yourself and work to process through them and bringing ourselves to the present moment. Do you think, have you ever experienced a moment of radical acceptance in your own life?
I feel that they are fleeting moments, and a lot of it is probably after, like, when we went to that spiritual coach, or,
Hmm.
like, coming out of a moment where I just feel so free.
In the beginning of the book, the biggest misunderstanding is that if we engage in acceptance, we will lose the ability to challenge ourselves and grow. That we would have the attitude of, this is who I am, take it or leave it. But she quotes Carl Rogers a lot, who says, when I accept myself for who I am, I can finally change. And so I think for me, we asked the question, like, have you ever experienced a moment of radical acceptance in your life? I can think about it like, oh, was there this moment where I totally loved myself? I don't know. Maybe, like you said, fleeting. But is there a longer feeling of, I know who I am and I'm working to improve myself? And if we call that radical acceptance, then I'm there. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like I've accepted myself, faults and all. And so I'm working toward improvement in a loving and compassionate way.
So I saw the concept of this. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the take on maybe your questions, but I actually saw this really as one of the thoughts I had here, Jess, was that idea of I'm in this moment. All of my past experiences have brought me into this moment, and everything that is happening in this moment is, you know, is okay, and I accept it and just surrendering to the moment. And the reason I'm describing it that way is I think that many of us actually, one of the things that changed me in this book was that, like, if you sit if you're sitting and doom scrolling, that to me is you're creating a distraction and you're not radically accepting the moment, right? You
Yeah.
being like literally truly being in this moment. So like one of the things I started to think about for myself on this book was that like if I sat down in a chair and I was like on my phone and I was like looking through things like shopping or whatever it is, I was just like, is this how I want to use this moment? And so part of radical acceptance to me was that like I'm creating a lot of distractions instead of really truly being in a moment and experiencing that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Other things to note to listeners, I have the paperback book, and Kelly and I also listened to the
The audio.
audiobook, and the audiobook is the original 2003 version, and I have my paperback is the updated 2021 version or 2023 version. And so in the original book, there are 12 chapters, and in the updated book, there are 13 chapters with different titles. But she has chapter 6 about wanting and the wanting self, and then having shame, and then covering feelings up as a way to satisfy emotional needs. What I'm hearing you say is that a lot of times we don't generally sit with and address our needs, and then we engage in whatever quickly meets the need that we never really thought about what it really was. So I think about my relationship with shopping and buying impulsively, and I want to sit and explore. Like, she says to ask yourself, what's that about? What does my heart really long for? And so I think that's a cool question to think about. I find myself going to Instagram all the time, and I'm like, what is happening? What you're
Yeah.
saying, right? And
Yes.
then I think Instagram makes me want things because obviously they're targeting me with various things. And so it's, what what am I really looking for? Tara Brach joined a Buddhist ashram when she was like 18 or 19 and very early. And so a lot of the book, she talks a lot about various belief systems, but this is through
Mhm.
a Buddhist lens. And so I don't know a lot about Siddhartha,
I
who
have that
is
book.
the
I have the book. I
original,
need to
who
listen to
is
it.
the Buddha who started Buddhism. Anyway, and so there's a legend of Siddhartha, and all of these gods try to he's, like, sitting and meditating, and they're all trying to distract him and whatever. I think about, like, when they talk about Jesus going to the desert and then Satan tempting him,
So
very
many
parallel, right?
parallels, so many
And so
parallels.
Mara, this god, kept distracting him, and so in part 4 of the book, invite Mara to tea. So something that was really, like, mind-blowing for me, and this is going to what you're saying, we're talking about doom scrolling, is can we sit with the discomfort? Can we ask, "What in me needs the most attention?" In a soft and gentle way, say to ourselves, "I see you." And letting vulnerability be known, naming or noting what's happening with gentleness, and seeing what needs attention. And one of the stories that like made me cry, and I've been telling my clients that story over and over again. I don't know if this even was on your radar, but the guy who had early onset dementia. Do you remember that story? So there
Keep
was
going.
a Buddhist practitioner who found out he had early onset dementia, and he came to one of her week-long retreats, and he told her a story about how he was giving a talk at his own ashram, and he stood up in front of everybody, and he totally blanked and had no idea what he was doing there and what he was supposed to talk about, and so he sat down and put his head down and just named his feelings, and in front of everybody, he said, "Embarrassed, ashamed, confused," and just sat and named all of his feelings, and then eventually he remembered everything and he gave his talk, and people were crying, and afterward, everyone came up to talk to him, and so I've been trying to do that with my 14-year-old of let's just name feelings, and I've been trying to do that with myself, and so I think that goes to what we're talking about Instagram scrolling or shopping or all of those things, like, where we're trying to, like, maybe busy ourselves and not give ourselves the space to just sit with discomfort and really explore
100%.
what the heck feeling is happening.
I totally agree. I definitely noticed that too, where I'm just if I feel something's bothering me, I'm not trying to, like, put it off. I really wanna sit with it because I think that's where you get freedom in a
Yeah,
lot of ways. I know it
right.
like, from the book, really, one of this she has a lot of amazing quotes, but one of them is, "The boundary to what we can accept is the boundary to our freedom," and I think sitting with these things and accepting that's what to me, that the acceptance is like sitting with myself and observing my feelings and saying, "Okay, these are how I'm feeling," and then
Yeah,
moving on from that.
yeah,
Instead of putting it off, or just not acknowledging it. The other quote she said, going back to this topic about the trance of unworthiness, is feeling unworthy goes hand in hand with feeling separate from others and separate from life. And I think
yes.
that is this huge part of this book is about everything that we hear about when we talk about spirituality, where we are all connected humans and we're
Mhm.
all connected in this life. And I think all of that is so important. That really is one of the themes of this book as well.
Yeah, connection, which I
Mhm.
know we talk about so much. Just summing up this little section on
Yeah.
trance, I like my favorite chapter, and I'm really curious for you, part 7, The Trance of Fear. And the audiobook, it's the same chapter. In the original version of the book, she calls it Opening Our Heart in the Face of Fear. And in the
Okay.
updated book, she calls it Meeting Fear with an Open and Engaged Presence. But I think I get clicked into the trance of fear all the freaking time. And this whole chapter, I'm like, Oh my gosh, but also, did you not feel crazy? Did you feel so validated and you're like, "I'm not crazy?"
What she said in that really resonated with me was, "Fear is the anticipation of pain." That is amazing to me
Yeah.
because it is so much how I'm operating, where something is
Yeah.
going to be difficult, and therefore I need to manage. I'm afraid of that happening, and so I'm
Yeah.
and my anxiety comes in because I'm afraid of that future thing. I've thought that there's gonna be pain, and so
Mhm.
since there's gonna be pain there, like, I operate in this way of fear. Super fascinating.
There was a quote, I don't know if you remember, it was like, "Life loves life, life loving life." And it's a quote from an Indian mystic: "Life is love and love is life. The means and forms may be wrong, but the motive behind is always love." So fear is life trying to protect life. And so also recognizing that when there's fear, it's because we're trying to protect and we want to stay alive. And it's like in
Mm.
human nature to want to stay alive. And this is where I feel like she talks about connectedness, right? Discover connected with others, find refuge in contemporaries, feeling and experiencing something similar, right? I get like stuck sometimes with my fear. It's like something will stick with me. And so a few years ago, during the height of the pandemic, I was seeing so many people who had experienced death and loss in their lives and suicide, like survivors of suicide, seeing a ton of survivors of suicide, and then reading books. And in all these books, like the mother dies. And then in my practice, I had all these clients who, let's say they had childhood trauma and one parent died and the whole family was changed forever. And I was just like absorbing. And so then every once in a while, I'll just get this fear of either I'm going to die or something's going to happen to my children. So, like, with what's happening with my youngest, I am so trenched in fear.
That it's, like, really killing you. Yeah. It also hits on, by the way, speaking of this interesting parallel, is I think because I feel like one of the things that's really coming up, and we talked about a little bit too, is this multi-generational trauma thing happening, and, like, we now all recognize, and one of the quotes that she gave in the book was imperfect parents had imperfect parents of their own, and how fears, insecurities, and desires get passed along for generations, and that's interesting too, what you're talking about, and if we think about our own previous generations and just loss of lives or children or whatever those things are, that could really be scary.
Did we talk about this in the podcast? Because that I don't know if it's a new study, right? But when a female baby is in utero and developed right before birth, all of their eggs are already there. When we're born, all of the eggs we have are there. So think about this. Are you ready for this? When grandma, let it easy,
Yeah. Was
had mom in
mom.
her
Mhm.
body as a
She had
egg,
us in her body, so we were in our
and then when we
grandmother's. Yes.
yes, and
Super
also
fascinating, right?
thinking about how mom would have been in her womb when everything was happening with grandpa being a POW, and just, like, mom would
Oh,
have been the egg
100%.
in there. I don't know, so just thinking about that's so, like, crazy. So we would have been in our
Yeah.
grandmother and about what would have been happening at that time in our grandmother's life, and I think I do appreciate this book talks a lot about trauma, and I do wanna get to the stories. So, we were talking about trance, and that was a big thing, and I loved it. The trance of fear resonated with Kelly and I, just zoning in those what ifs in your life and finding ways to feel safe and discover connectedness and the meditation. All of those tools and tips were super helpful. And then there was another section of the book, mindfulness and self-compassion, where Tara Brach blends Buddhist teachings with psychology to show how mindfulness can help us meet our inner struggles and strength. So, Kelly, how do you think, after both of us reading this book, we can cultivate more self compassion in our daily lives.
I think for me, that is a lot of just meditation and mindfulness. Going through this book and really realizing that we we have to give ourselves love. Tara Brach says, attention is the most basic form of love. And if we think about it that way, give ourselves attention, right? To
Yeah.
practice that self
Yeah.
compassion. How about you, Jess?
I love this section, and I apologize. I don't know where it was, if it was in the rain section. Kelly and I've talked a lot about rain before. So in this book, she has a whole chapter on rain, which I love. And rain is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And she had that little thing. If we think about a ski slope or a ski track, and it's where the skis are, like, steeped in mud, and she gave an example of a light rain where you can really recognize, allow, investigate, nurture in, like, a quick way, and that's like a
Mhm.
light dusting of snow over our well-worn path to get us to try to do something else. So I think that's the same as, like, sitting with Mara, where it's like, if we can just give ourselves a minute to sit and think, what the heck is happening right now?" And then also when we look at the nurture piece, we recognize, we allow it to come in, we investigate what's this really about. And the nurture piece, there was that whole section on being the holder and being the held. If you remember that. And then there was a woman and she was a single mother and she worked 2 jobs and her teen was acting out and she was working all the time. And so she was just like, I'm a terrible mother when Tara's working with her. I'm a terrible mother. I'm horrible, blah, blah, blah. And so she is like, who in your life gave you unconditional love? And she was like, my mother and my grandmother. And she said, can you allow yourself to be held by them? And so that resonates with me because I know she talks about the Buddha and she talks about all these different Buddhist people and what the branches of Buddhism that people see, or maybe you can let God hold you or Jesus hold you. But I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily there. That doesn't resonate with me. But thinking of like a family member holding me is something like I can give self compassion by letting myself be held by that.
I loved that it was like putting it in the hand
Yeah.
and holding or feeling that you're being held by putting something in your hand. I forget what there was part of the book, but like
Mhm.
the concept of holding as a
Yeah.
human
Right.
is this feeling of being cared for and
Yeah.
being loved. And that is
Yeah.
such a important part of this book. And really even I thought it was fascinating again, thinking about others where it was like trying to send love and kindness to others as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, and I know Tara's not perfect at it when she talked about driving and being angry about other people driving, but then
Yeah.
really you get frustrated with other people and, like, really sending them, like, love and kindness.
Yeah. That
Gr
kicks us out of the trance.
Yes, yes. So part of this mindfulness and self-compassion is what she talks about is this idea of really recognizing what's happening inside of you and looking at it, thinking about it with a loving heart. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is the thing that practicing that mindfulness is just sitting with something.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved how in the book, like we were talking about, there's so many stories that people have struggled with self-judgment and shame. Was there another story that stood out to you? There were so many stories that stood out to me, like Barbara, whose dad was an alcoholic, and her mom was giving her attention when she was a baby, and the dad was like, "Stop, where's my dinner?" and held her underwater. Did that not do you remember that one? And so then Barbara became like a people pleaser. That was the person in the fear chapter, right? Because then she was so afraid of letting people down and living in fear that she'd make other angry. And so then it's like crazy to me, right? But like when you say a lot in the podcast, you're a people pleaser. If there are opportunity to sit and go back, because like with Barbara, it was like, oh, I don't want to make people angry. Like I made my father was angry. So I'm so worried everything I do, I'm gonna make my dad angry. And so that was fascinating in her story. And then I loved how not everybody, or maybe, I don't know, does everybody in the story have a conclusion and figure things out, do you think?
I think that a lot of the stories of the people, I think they did figure it out, but this is about a lifelong commitment to
Yeah.
modifying, changing, stopping the cycle, whatever it is. And I don't know how much she gives a lot of really great examples of people she's worked with. At the same time, it just seems like they improved and then moved on with
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I don't remember specifically a lot of the stories, Jess.
Yeah.
You have such a good memory. Also doing the audiobook, it's like I think of it all, but to come back to it, I think that's where having the physical book is so much more helpful.
Well, I did the first, I wanna say, like, 9 chapters audiobook, but then I was like, the whole time I kept wanting to go look at the book and flip through and go back through, so then I did the rest of the book. So I went back and forth, but I am an auditory learner. Are you an auditory learner? I'm an auditory learner.
100%.
And I
Very
also I
much.
love case studies, and maybe it's just, like, my nosiness of loving to hear about people's stories. And I love, like you're saying, Tara's story is that she's human and you feel better because 'cause you're like, "Well, you're just this Buddhist person who's, like, super zen all the time." And she talked about beating on her son's door for playing video games. But I was like, "Oh, that totally resonated, that was helpful."
Yeah, no, I agree. I
Yeah.
liked those as well. I had a hard time getting into this book in
You
general.
did.
I would
Yeah,
say,
I
yeah.
remember you were like,
You were
Jess,
like,
I don't
"Oh
know
my
why
god,
you're
I'm loving it."
obsessed."
And I was
Yeah.
like, "It's okay." But I think as the book goes on, she really I think the reason I had a hard time getting into it is I had a hard time connecting with the book.
Mhm.
And as the story goes on or as the book goes on, she gives a lot more anecdotal pieces
Mhm.
and really is able to draw a connection between a lot of her own views and teachings and what she's learned with real life. And that's where it
Yeah.
really started like the rubber met the road.
Mhm.
There's so many things that I loved in terms of this self-compassion, Jess. She talks a lot about the concept of suffering, and we grew up in such a religious Catholic upbringing that really suffering is like this it's like a battle
Key to
scar.
godliness.
Yes. And for her, she talked so much about freeing yourself from suffering. Like we're not beings meant to suffer. And it goes back to
Right.
fear, pain, and everything else. But
Right.
it was just like ending that suffering and having the freedom
Yeah.
to love life
Yeah.
and be happy. I feel like that is, it doesn't come out. Radical acceptance to me would be what I see as like happiness, right? That nothing is,
Yeah.
I see where these Buddhist people like are at such a calm. They are truly happy and they're having the same lives we
But
are.
you're doing the work.
Tara
The
has
you have to be
at
keep
least
doing
one
the work.
child. That's a pain in the ass. And we may have multiple, but like that's not getting that girl down. She is
Yeah.
happy, she is centered, and she's living her life.
What's the quote in the book about, I thought I wrote it down, it's something like, "Pain is part of life, but we don't have to suffer." Something like
I didn't
that.
grab that quote, but yeah, that
It
makes
was
sense.
and it was something like that, right? That it's like, we're gonna experience pain, and we're gonna be uncomfortable. We don't have to, like, constantly live in it. And I think for me, if we I so we're talking about the book offers practical exercises and stories and guided meditations and real life examples on how radical acceptance can help us heal our wounds, navigate relationships, cultivate peace in our life. I think that's what we're taking away
Yes.
too, is the
Yeah.
cultivating peace in our life.
Yep.
And I think her big message is we often resist difficult emotions rather than accept it. So do you think you've lined up for you how you can start practicing sitting with discomfort instead of pushing it away?
I have. I do because I really think that is the pathway to freedom for me and emotional freedom. and this idea of radical acceptance and just accepting the moment as it is and really being open to a kind, loving heart, and not only for myself, but toward others as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how about you, Jess?
I think I'd like to continue my morning meditation, maybe add some journaling with some questions. And I would like to start sitting down at the end of every night and start going through my day and asking some questions,
Well,
kind of
I
what's that
definitely have
about, those
started
kinds of things.
to
Yeah.
yeah, to your point, I have started my day with a meditation and really like a reflection is
Yeah.
what I would call it. The other thing I thought was interesting is she talked about mindful prayer. I don't know if you caught that
Mhm.
during this. I love that for people who are praying people, mindful prayer was an interesting idea. I think she tries to blend Buddhist concepts with also just Christian beliefs as well, right? Because I think sometimes we all get caught up in can you be one thing and another, but it's really about just practical views and ways that you can improve yourself or improve your life.
Did you take away do you have any takeaways on how you think radical acceptance can help in relationships with your family or friends or partners?
I absolutely do. I think one of the things that she talked about with radical acceptance is that it is recognizing what's happening inside of us, inside of me, and regarding what I see or how I see it with an open, kind, loving heart. And that has completely changed from a parenting perspective where I hope that I can continue this because it's worked for the last
Yeah.
week, especially
Yeah.
with a teenager where I tend to jump to a conclusion and then backtrack and instead approach the situation with a kind, loving heart. So it's, "Hey, what's going on with that? How is this going?" Instead of, "Don't forget to do that, do this, do that." And so I've been able to take a step back. I think this for me and my relationships, I think honestly, particularly with Wes right now, this really resonated, having a teenage son where I am trying to release my tentacles of being overbearing with him and just letting him live his life. How
And
about
I
you?
like just those questions of what's going on? What do you need? Like I have so I do I think there's a whole thing on forgiveness. We talk about the story about Amy who's found out her husband cheated on her and she was like, "Get out, I'm never forgiving you."
Ye
And
yes,
then when she worked with Tara, it was really like, I hate myself because I was like a witch and a horrible wife, and I hate myself and I'm never forgiving myself. And so just her journey of forgiveness and how forgiving others often also means forgiving ourselves and
100%.
just working through forgiveness. And so also her and
That's a
her
great
partner at
point.
one point went through the rain method together. Like they got upset, they separated, they did rain and they got back together. And so those are some things that we can do with maybe our partners of, hey, let's take a pause here. I think we're you're screaming at me about the dishes, but maybe something else is going on here. So let's separate and explore that or whatever. And like I said with my 14-year-old, I've been sitting and saying, let's just say feelings. Let's just list feelings that are happening. I think that is really helpful. And again, having compassion. There was a woman that blew up at work, Kim. She blew up at her coworker, and then she had all this guilt about it. And so she sat and thought about, what do you think my coworker was going through? And what do I think? Just exploring compassion. So, yeah, I totally see that. I think, do you think that there is any part of the book that has challenged your existing beliefs or habits most?
I think this goes back to the idea of really trying to I think I jump like I said, like, I jump to these conclusions about a lot of things, and instead of just taking a moment and looking at what I'm observing and having a conversation and really, I guess, in my vernacular, I would say it's challenging my beliefs of I I think sometimes I tend to lead with emotion and it's not always a positive emotion.
Yeah.
And instead, like really getting in the habit of putting my attention to what's happening and just
Right.
accepting it for what it is, and then
Right.
drawing observations from that moment instead of assuming other things. I don't know. Does that make sense? What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. No, and I think that was where I had finished this morning about like slowing down our reactions. How do we
Yes.
slow down our reactions and work on that? And I think we all are. And again, if you're going around in trance, right, you're not going to be so mindful and intentional and it's going to be easier to react.
Yeah. And in terms of habits, one of the quotes in the book, or one of the things that she says is, when we pause, we don't know what will happen next. But by disrupting our habitual behaviors, we open the possibility to new and creative ways of responding to our wants and our fears. And this goes back to both of us. Like, you're in these moments, and she even talked like the rain method, right? Pausing.
Yeah.
You're in this moment, pause and disrupt what you normally do.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful because it does open up new ways to respond to things and that you wouldn't have normally done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that this book is an invitation to be kinder to ourselves and to live with more presence and peace. It's not about ignoring challenges, but facing them with compassion instead of criticism.
100%. Jesse and I really encourage you to read Radical Acceptance if you haven't already. Once you have, we would love to hear your thoughts anytime about this book. This is a book that will stay with you for the rest of your life. This, to me, is one of those life changing books that we cannot recommend enough, especially for all of us who want to practice more self compassion and live more in the present. Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe so you can hear our latest episodes as soon as they drop.
If you loved today's episode, share with a friend. Find us on Instagram, Facebook at Chasing Brighter, or check out our blog at chasingbrighter.com and follow us. If you want to know more about Kelly and I, read our blogs, find more tips, tools, and resources, check that out at chasingbrighter.com. Thanks. Remember, your best life is just a listen away.